Tomorrow at 7, Headliners, a testing quiz show with host Derek Jameson putting the questions to special guests John Conte, Vicky Michelle, Katie Boyle and Bernie Winters.
Diana made her first film at the age of 14. Philippa, what was the name of the film?
Oh, do me a favour, honestly.
I really want to say the railway children.
Remembering the stories that made the news of yesteryear. Headliners, tomorrow at 7 on Thames.
In a couple of minutes, we join John Suchet with the news from ITN.
Sunshine and sea air brings out the athlete in all of us.
All right.
Don't think you get very far on that surfboard. Still, glad to see there's plenty of the liquid lifesaver. Like a wave of nectar breaking over your tongue. What's going on there, mate?
Oh, they're digging the Channel Tunnel.
Hope it goes further than your bridge.
Foster's, the amber nectar.
The thing that makes a holiday, for me, is a bowl of Kellogg's Fruit and Fibre by the sea. All the sand and surf and sun and fruit and whole wheat flakes, what fun! I can't think of anywhere I'd rather be. A bowl of Kellogg's Fruit and Fibre's doubly ace. Lots of fruit and nuts and crunchy whole wheat flakes.
Whole wheat flakes!
Apples, hazelnuts, bananas, raisins, coconuts, sultanas. When we're on our holes, we eat it by the case.
The Atari 520 ST has twice the power of many business micros. It handles business with ease. It can paint pictures and make them move. It can play advanced games. Yet it costs less than £300. The Atari 520 ST. Power without the price.
Kuros, the winning fragrance.
Hinari. Compact disc is on the street. Hinari DSK3 with turntable, tuner, 10-band graphic equalizer, front-loading programmable CD, twin cassettes and 35 watts total music power. Hinari DSK3 with compact disc, $249.95. On the high streets now. Hinari.
Steven Spielberg presents Inner Space when this test pilot gets miniaturized and injected into this grocery clerk.
I'm possessed!
Together they'll launch this Christmas's wildest adventure.
Kitty more cows! Jack Clare to the rescue!
Inner Space, directed by Joe Dante.
On the 60s Party Mega Mix album, the hits just keep on coming. From Dusty Springfield to Dave D, Jerry and the Pacemakers, and the Kinks. 60 non-stop mega mixes with the Hollies and Tom Jones.
What's new, pussycat?
The 60-track party album you can't be without. Get the 60s Party Mega Mix album. It's music to your ears from Telstar.
When my company asked me if I'd like to work in Paris, why, I jumped at the chance. I didn't realize they meant Paris, Texas. Just look at the place. Thank heavens for Monterey. A delightfully bittersweet blend of white wine, brandy, and a subtle tang of orange. My only other pleasure is reading the weather reports.
Monterey, for those bittersweet moments.
This week in TV Times, the show of shows before Her Majesty the Queen, the Royal Variety Performance, the Show Business Night of the Year, a cavalcade of stars, including Tom Jones, who talks to TV Times about his plans to return home. There's a rare interview with 6 times married Rex Harrison, now in his 80th year. We take Marty Kane to Thailand, and there's your chance to not only design, but win a £100,000 dream house, all in this week's TV Times.
And there's also a very interesting article in this week's TV Times all about ex-Beatle Paul McCartney. Well, time now for 2 new musical videos. And first up, Jethro Tull, one of the surviving bands of the late 60s. Led by Ian Anderson, the song is Steel Monkey. Ian Anderson and Jethro Tull. Where was his flute? Seemed to be missing, didn't it? Well, now to our second music video. It's from a group called Wax, which are made up of a duo consisting of ex-10cc bass player Graham Gouldman and American singer Andrew Gold. Now, if you remember, they had a hit with Building a Bridge to Your Heart. Well, here's the title track from their current album, American English. We now join ITN for a roundup of the world news, the time 1 minute past 5.
Schulz and Shevardnadze reach arms agreement in Geneva. China's new Prime Minister is a reformer. After deficit agreement, Europe cuts interest rates. Cuban prisoners in America hold over 100 hostage. Hello, I'm John Suchet in London with the world news from ITN. America and the Soviet Union have agreed on the final details of a treaty to scrap all medium-range nuclear missiles in Europe. The treaty itself will be signed at the Superpower Summit in Washington in 2 weeks' time. Both sides have been battling for weeks to overcome the last obstacles to a deal. Now it's finally been sealed in Geneva with a handshake between the American Secretary of State, Mr. Schulz, and the Soviet Foreign Minister, Mr. Shevardnadze. After the talks, Mr. Schulz said the treaty goes far beyond anything that's been attempted before. And Mr. Shevardnadze said the next step should be the elimination of all nuclear weapons. The treaty will mean scrapping the cruise and Pershing missiles in West Germany, Belgium, Britain and Italy, along with the Soviet SS-20 missiles in the Eastern Bloc. It was an unusually buoyant George Schulz who looked at the sky over Geneva this morning, then shook hands with Soviet Foreign Minister Shevardnadze and his officials on a day that brought a successful end to 21 months of intensive superpower bargaining and concessions on intermediate-range weapons, as well as apparent progress towards agreement on other non-arms control issues.
Minister Shevardnadze and I are shaking hands. And the reason is that we've now completed agreement on all of the outstanding INF issues. All that remains is some treaty language which others will be able to do. So we're very pleased that we have this result.
I think that what we have done is in the interest of all nations on this planet. And we have no doubt that the summit meeting in Washington will be successful.
And grinning behind the foreign ministers, the two architects of the deal. On the left, Viktor Karpov, head of the Soviet Foreign Ministry's Arms Control Directorate. On the right, 80-year-old veteran arms negotiator Paul Nitze, the two men who once got their knuckles rapped for hatching the walk-in-the-woods compromise. The foreign ministers shook hands on a deal which, after the negotiators have clinched the fine print over the next 10 days, and after the American Senate eventually ratifies the deal, will rid the world of 1,000 missiles and 2,000 warheads. Among the negotiators there was clear relief, and from the Soviet foreign minister, even a jocular word of praise for the rarely seen Marshal Akrameyev on the extreme right, introduced as the most peaceful chief of general staff. President Reagan welcomed the Geneva Agreement. He said it was reliable and credible. But he also gave a warning that he would not abandon his Star Wars defense program to secure an arms control treaty with the Soviet Union. Speaking in Denver to employees working on the Star Wars project, he said giving up Star Wars would be too high a price to pay. A leading supporter of China's economic reforms and openness to the West has been chosen as the country's new Prime Minister. He is 59-year-old Li Peng, an adopted son of the former Premier Zhou Enlai. Li said his first priority would be to reduce inefficiency and overstaffing in government.
Since his election to the five-man ruling Politburo a few weeks ago, Li Peng's promotion from vice premier had been expected. Li Peng is seen as one of the more unflamboyant and cautious members of the new informal Chinese leadership. Regarded as a compromise candidate, he was personally chosen by China's two most powerful leaders. He'll oversee the policies of economic reform and separation of party and government pioneered by the General Secretary Zhao Ziyang and Deng Xiaoping, who remains the supreme leader, although officially retired. The dangers of the post were illustrated earlier this year when thousands of students rioted in favour of more democracy than the leadership wanted. It lost the then Prime Minister his job, and it will now be Li Peng's responsibility to win the people's support. His main task is to modernise Chinese industry by encouraging the use of high technology from the West. He's already promised to continue private initiative and profit-making despite accusations that his Soviet training makes him favour central planning. Above all, he's known as particularly keen to force China's traditional peasant economy to compete with the West by developing its backward nuclear and computer industries.
Cuban prisoners who've been rioting at two jails in the United States have rejected a government offer to delay sending them back to their homeland. At least one person has been killed and many more injured during the riots in Atlanta, Georgia and at Oakdale, Louisiana. Over 100 prisoners are still being held hostage.
The buildings at the Atlanta State Detention Center were burned to the ground. Helicopters tried to fight the flames without success. At least one prisoner is known to have been shot to death, and there are unconfirmed reports that up to 5 others have also died. The fires were fueled by an explosion at the jail. The cause remains unknown. Firefighters were unable to investigate. 75 people, inmates and warders, are still being held hostage at the Atlanta jail. In Oakdale, Louisiana, where the unrest began, inmates are threatening to kill 28 hostages. 100,000 Cubans arrived in the United States 7 years ago in the Mariel boat lift, named after the port from which they left. American authorities said they were only allowed to leave Cuba because they were criminals. Rioting began when the Americans finally decided to deport them. The Reagan administration offered to do a deal with the prisoners. No immediate deportations if the hostages go free.
The purpose of this statement is to restore order, to protect the safety of all persons involved, including those detained, and to assure fair treatment.
That offer is far from the all-embracing climb down the prisoners want. They still run the risk of deportation, and there's no indication that they will end their unrest soon.
Other world stories in brief. A small plane carrying commuters crashed while trying to land in Alaska, killing 16 people. The weather was good at the time, and the cause of the crash is not yet known. Special tribunals will be set up in Bangladesh to try those charged with arson and bombing during the recent disturbances against President Ershad. 10 people, including 2 policemen, were killed in the demonstrations. The charges carry the death penalty. 3 people were killed in the Haitian capital Port-au-Prince during a night of shooting attacks. The violence was intended to disrupt Sunday's national elections, the first free elections in Haiti for 30 years. One of El Salvador's most senior rebel leaders has returned home for the first time since 1980. Guillermo Ungo has said he wants peace talks with the government. Another rebel leader, Ruben Zamora, has already returned. But President Duarte has said he will arrest any rebel leaders who refuse to renounce violence.
Guillermo Ungo stepped from the airport onto El Salvadorian soil for the first time in 7 years to a wildly enthusiastic greeting from his left-wing supporters. Together with Ruben Zamora, he heads the FDR, that's the political wing of